With a sample of Mozart's blood and a woman, someone with the skill and the equipment could breed a few hundred baby Mozarts.
Not Mozart, Doktor.
Zähle bis 3, dann ist das Bett gemacht.
Und 1 und 2
Und 3!
Hello and welcome back to Journey Through Sci-Fi, where we journey through the many subgenres of science fiction on screen. I am Matt.
And I'm James, and in this series we're exploring the sci-fi subgenre of mad science. And in today's episode we'll be looking at The Boys from Brazil from 1978 and Das Experiment from 2001.
Yeah, we've had a bit of a break. I hope you've enjoyed your summer holidays, listeners, because we're coming in with some heavy films. We're talking about Nazi scientists and Stanford Prison Experiment, horrible experiments on people reinterpreted into fiction.
Yeah, it's not just mad science, it's horrific, nasty science in this episode. I think there's some real psychological stuff going on in these films. There's some terrible stuff that happened just in general around the real life situations that these are both sort of like loosely based on. There's quite a lot to cover in today's episode in terms of them. Had you seen either of these before?
No, I hadn't seen either of these. I hadn't even heard of Das Experiment. And we've talked about the Stanford Prison Experiment before on the show. I can't remember the context, but it's come up once or twice. But I didn't know there was a film, a sort of fictionalized version of it. A couple of fictionalized versions of it. We're looking at the German version from 2001. But and I was vaguely aware of the plot of The Boys from Brazil, but no, I hadn't seen either. Had you?
I'd seen Das Experiment when I was a teenager, and revisiting it again was a very different experience this time round, being a bit older and sort of, just looking at it from like a lens in your 30s as opposed to I'm a teenager, I'm looking for cool, weird art house stuff. Knowing the background of that as well really put it into a different light watching it this time round. But we debated whether to put these two films together for quite a while, didn't we?
I was a bit nervous. I was a bit nervous about talking about them because they are about real life human experimentation, really horrible science. So the mad science in this context is really real life unethical scientific experimentation on humans, which is a tough topic to get into. I watched particularly The Boys from Brazil. So it's about Josef Mengele, who is, really one of history's most evil people, really cruel, horrible stuff he did. I didn't particularly want to talk about a film about him, but the film doesn't dwell or depict what he did in the war. It kind of builds on that, and the plot kind of uses that as a launching point. Yeah,
and I think with Das Experiment as well, just the psychological stuff that's going on in that film and the sort of journey that the characters go on is a really interesting one, but also quite a harrowing depiction of this experiment in that. So a slight trigger warning to anyone who may not be ready to listen to this kind of content in today's podcast, but I think we should launch into The Boys from Brazil from 1978.
History has shown how one man with a dream can turn the world into a nightmare. Can history repeat itself? The Boys from Brazil starts where that nightmare left off. But for the dream to live again, 94 men must die.
So this is based on Ira Levin's novel. Ira Levin has come up in the podcast before. He wrote, most famously, he wrote Rosemary's Baby, which we haven't covered, but he also wrote The Stepford Wives, which we have covered.
Yes.
And it's directed by Franklin J. Schaffner. Do you recognise that name, James?
I do, but I'm trying to rack my brain as to why I remember it.
So a name that you might more readily remember is Paul Dini, who was not involved in the first Planet of the Apes movie, but we talked about extensively on Patreon because he was heavily involved in the rest. But who was involved in the first one is Franklin J. Schaffner, who directed it.
I should have known that, Matt.
You should have
known it.
Yeah, so he directed this adaptation of the novel. I haven't read the novel. I've no idea how faithful it is. But what did you expect going into this film then, not knowing about it?
Well, like you said at the start, I think a lot of it has been put up on the internet already as to what you kind of get when you go into this film. I think when it first came out, all of the stuff around, spoiler alert, but cloning and all of where that leads, I feel like that would have been a massive spoiler when this film first came out, because I assume they must have marketed it as a thriller film, and you don't really find out what's going on with all of these children and the killings which Mengele's organised at the beginning. You don't really know what's happening. It's framed as this kind of mystery at the beginning. So again, throwing it into our mad science sci-fi series, I was a little bit like, okay, I hope there is actually some sort of cloning, some mad science going on here. But of course there is. But all of that kind of made me go in with certain preconceived notions of what I would get in this film.
Yeah. I think we talked about the kind of nervousness around talking about it. I mean, that was the issue, right? I knew that it was a story about Josef Mengele, and I was worried that we were going to end up talking, at length about what he did in the war in the context of mad science, which is too lighthearted of a sort of context to talk about those things. Yeah. So I was relieved to watch the film and understand that it is a movie about cloning in a sort of more traditional sci-fi mad science context, which is why we want to talk about it. But yeah, had those nerves. And then yeah, you're quite right. The cloning doesn't come into it for ages. So I was sitting there watching it, just nerve-wracked, like, this is just about Nazis, for fuck's sake, because it does play out like a mystery thriller, and you don't know why Mengele is orchestrating this plot. I mean, it's a good like Nazi hunter thriller. It's got, you've got characters in Europe, you've got your Nazis in South America, and they're tracking and trying to find them and trying to unravel this mystery, but we just don't know what the mystery is. And I got all wrapped up in it. I think I did know that there was a Hitler cloning plot because it's kind of the most famous thing about the film, but yeah, watching it and getting wrapped up in it, I kind of forgot all of that, and I was like, what's happening in this story? Why is he doing these things?
Yeah, because the initial setup of the story is you've got Steve Guttenberg making a surprise appearance. I did not expect to see him.
Credited as Steven Guttenberg, so he's very serious young actor.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Steve Guttenberg, famous Police Academy and Three Men and a Baby and all that kind of stuff, here in The Boys from Brazil at the beginning. And he's finding out about this plot from this group of Nazis that he's found in Brazil, and he's doing all this surveillance on them. And he's in touch with this guy, Ezra Lieberman, who is played by Laurence Olivier. And he's trying to get the word out that, look, there's something going on here. These people are Nazis. You're a Nazi hunter, Lieberman. Can you help me out and try and figure out what they're plotting? And it all gets really high tension, high stakes straight away. And you've got Gutenberg's character getting killed off very quickly. And then suddenly we're in this plot where we found out this information about Mengele's plan to kill a number of 65-year-old men which have some sort of connection to the government, all in different countries. We don't really know why, but we know that it's important. So you've got this immediate, really interesting setup as to what is going on here. Why is this horrific scientist from the Nazi party now living in Brazil doing this, and what connection does it have? So we spent the rest of the film sort of following Lieberman and Mengele. They're at odds with each other. Both are trying to find out what the other's doing, and you just got this kind of like really intriguing thriller plot throughout, which you're immediately invested in.
Yeah, it's like a spy thriller. It's plotted like a spy thriller, isn't it? And I would even say Gregory Peck, I don't know if this is not giving him enough credit, but he almost plays it like a Bond villain at times. He's very grandiose and menacing, a very good Bond villain, not a cheesy Bond villain, like he's megalomaniacal, he's unhinged, obsessive and powerful, and leading this cult of personality down in Where is he? He's not in Brazil, is he? He's in Paraguay, I think, during the movie.
I think so, for the majority of it, because he moves from the initial place to somewhere else, doesn't he?
The adoptions happened in Brazil, but that was 14 years ago or whatever. Yeah, so he settled in Paraguay, which it's worth noting is broadly true. Obviously not the cloning stuff, but South America, Paraguay, time in Brazil, that's all true of Josef Mengele. He escaped after the war and set up shop in South America, like dotting around to escape the authorities and the real life Nazi hunters who were after him. And, unfortunately, lived to a fairly ripe old age and I think died of natural causes, and was never caught despite best efforts of real people like Ezra Lieberman. And that's all live. That's a live thing when the film was made.
Which is mad to think about it, because you're fictionalizing a known Nazi scientist in this film. And obviously it's based on the book, but having those real life characters thrown into a thriller science fiction film has its own weight to it, doesn't it? Because it's how do you treat this character in this film? And even the way that you see his laboratory in Brazil and all this kind of stuff, it's scary to watch because there's certain things in there, like you see some of the local population and they've had their eyes turned blue and they've had their hair changed color. And this is stuff that he was known to have carried out in real life. And that kind of adds an extra sort of like real life horror to it. The fact that these experiments that are happening in this fictionalized film that you're watching are not too far from reality.
Yeah, they tread a bit of a fine line with stuff like that. I mean, changing the colour of people's eyes is very much on the softer end of the scale of what Mengele was doing in Auschwitz, although that was deadly and very bad for the people who were subjected to that. But he did like unbelievably awful things to other people. So stuff like that you can't put in a sort of mystery thriller of this tone and not make it too horrifying, really. Like, he's the bad guy, but we can't depict him on screen in a thriller movie doing those things that he did in Auschwitz. It would just be unpleasant and inappropriate. But they do manage to create an interesting character out of him. He's a compelling villain, and obviously he's matched by a really compelling protagonist as well in Lieberman, played by Olivier. Like, for me, it's really sensitive subject matter, and the film gets away with depicting a lot of this stuff in large part through some of the best performances I've ever seen. Gregory Peck is amazing in this film. He is menacing and terrifying and crazy and unhinged. And Laurence Olivier, I don't really know Laurence Olivier as an actor. Like, I know the name, obviously. He's one of the most famous actors of all time. But when you get down to it, he did a ton of Shakespeare stuff. And I don't spend a lot of time watching Shakespeare. Like, I'm just not that familiar with his work as an actor. And then, I put this on. He's absolutely amazing in the role. He's not this badass action hero Nazi hunter going around the world bringing them to justice. He's a old man, very world weary, tired, and doing this job that he believes is very important and can't retire because of the importance of his job.
But Olivier was sick before this or during this, or probably a bit of both, because wasn't he recovering from cancer at the time?
Was he? I mean, he looks old, I guess. And I know this is far from his last film, but it's very much towards the end of his career, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think at this point he was trying to continue with his acting, continue with making films, because he wanted to make sure that he had money to leave behind to his family. So he was very much sort of carrying on as he could. But maybe that sort of weariness was in actually Olivier as well as the character itself. But I think all of this is contributing into his performance, and what an amazing performance it is. You can see sort of like he is like playing this Holocaust survivor, and just the emotion he's putting into, look, I've got to try and track down these horrible people, because if I don't, they'll get forgotten about and they will just sort of disappear off into obscurity without having to pay for their actions. So all of this is really powerful in this film.
Yeah. But there's also a sense that he's kind of in the twilight of that career, isn't there? He has the interactions with Austrian authority, or is it a journalist? I can't remember, but somebody, he's trying to like get some buy-in into what he's doing. And they're a bit like, yeah, I'm not, you did well with the prison guard a few years ago, but I'm not really interested anymore. Come back when you've got something more compelling. It feels like it's on the wane. This is like a last ditch effort for him, really. And Mengele is like a huge, criminal, a war criminal, culpable of many, many crimes, much more than, like, for example, a prison guard that he managed to contribute to the imprisonment of earlier. So this is a big story for him. But he's also like, when Steve Guttenberg's calling it in, he's like, oh yeah, I don't care. I know Mengele's down there. Like, come back when you've got more evidence or whatever. It's taken its toll on him, and it's clearly extremely hard work.
Going back to Gregory Peck's fictionalized version of Mengele, when I was watching this, and especially sort of the setting and like it being in Brazil and the kind of the stuff that they show Mengele wearing, it made me think of Charles Lawton in Island of Lost Souls and Dr. Moreau. And it has an eerily similar feel to it, doesn't it? His character seems like Moreau, like these horrendous experiments he's doing on people. It's just like too close for comfort, those kind of comparisons that are happening there. This fictionalized character that was there in 1932 being portrayed as like this real life person in this film. I think that kind of made me feel a bit unnerved.
Yeah, well, we talk about it quite a lot this series, the sort of the ego and the God complex combined with unchecked power. That's what we see in some of these some of the villains in the mad science stories. So it's not surprising that there are similarities to some of the other ones that we've talked about already. But the kind of tropical setting as well, I guess, that adds to it. There's more familiar tropes there, or similar tropes rather.
And speaking of tropes, they really lean into this science fiction element of it as well, sort of midway through the film when you get the reveal about the cloning. And it's quite interesting the way they depict it, because it's treated with that level of scientific accuracy that feels quite genuine in this. The way that they're talking about it in the classroom makes you think, okay, this could have been a real life scenario that they were planning for.
Yeah, there's this huge info dump, isn't there, in the middle of the film? We go to a university, or Lieberman goes to a university, and we get a whole science lecture in the middle of the film to kind of explain and introduce the cloning concept. And then it rapidly goes into science fiction for the rest of the movie, doesn't it? Yeah,
because when they're doing the explanation of it, it's all about like, okay, so which person in history would you want to clone? Would you want to clone a lot of Mozarts? You've got a world full of Mozarts and Shakespeares and all of these famous worldly people. But it's just how that can be manipulated as well. As always in a science fiction film, it's looking at the sort of good and bad aspects of science to kind of hold some sort of moral lesson and hold a mirror up to the audience as well, and just be like, okay, so this is how it could go wrong. Let's just have a reality check here. So they've got all of that stuff in there.
So is the technology inherently bad in this film?
I think there's always a bit of a question mark about the idea of cloning, because the idea of creating an exact duplicate, I mean, we sort of like in Mickey 17, it was quite interesting the way that the clones changed in character, and they had different environmental factors involved in that as well. In this, they're really going into detail about they want to create the exact environment that Hitler grew up in. Yeah, because because Mengele's trying to create loads of Hitler clones so that that kind of ideology and his thinking and Hitler's ideologies and beliefs and all of this kind of stuff, he's trying to recreate them by having the same family dynamic so that these children grow up in the same way. And it's that kind of nature versus nurture thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and in this film, nature and nurture, isn't it? That's the plan. It's the combination of both, which it becomes an extremely high concept plan at that point, doesn't it? And that's why it's 90. So the plot is it's this assassination of 94 government employees around the world. that doesn't seem to make any sense. That's the plot that he's scheming at that gets uncovered. And investigating that, Lieberman finds out that at least three or four of the children of the men being assassinated all look identical, like literally identical twins, identical. And from there, we unravel the plot that they are cloned from DNA of Hitler, orchestrated by Mengele, and the assassination is to replicate Hitler's dad dying at a certain age, and there's other sort of nurture factors that he is trying to control. Yes, they're all carefully selected so that they will be even like there's an age gap between the mother and the father. You know, sort of a ridiculous level of like complex admin that has gone into planning this to find the exact right candidates. But that's what he's done, and then the assassinations are one of the kind of trigger points in the journey that he believes will activate something in these young boys to make them the leader, the type of leader that Hitler was. We're getting into quite mad science there as well, aren't we? Like, do you believe that these boys would grow up to be like Hitler, like the Hitler? They're genetically identical, and they have some, like a small number of similar elements to their upbringing. But, you know, they didn't serve in World War One and exist in 1920s, 1930s Germany with all of the myriad context of that upbringing. I think it's extremely far-fetched at this point, but I don't know. What do you think? It's the same DNA, that's one thing.
Yeah, the way they play it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because they don't do the reveal that there's going to be a bunch of clones until quite a way in. And the way they do it as well is they show you one child at the beginning, and then there's a bit where there's another child introduced, but you just see a puppet, like a Punch and Judy puppet. And it's implied that that is one of the other Hitler clones. It's hiding the fact that there's another child there, yet you're shown this family and you're shown like the father being killed and all this kind of stuff. So they're bit by bit showing you these children, but it's when you meet the children, you start not just seeing the physical appearance similarities, but something in the way that they talk. They all have some kind of artistic flair, whether it's drawing or whether it's photography, and those little bits are kind of the similarities of these kids.
And what can only be described as a shitty attitude in the ones that we meet, like, or a weird attitude. There's the sort of snooty, snobby one in Germany who is just looking down his nose at Lieberman. And you don't really, I think that's the first one we fully see.
Yeah.
And I didn't clock that he was supposed to be a clone at that point. I was just like, well, this kid's a bit of a prick. And then move on. And then, is it Bobby, the one that has the most screen time at the end of the movie, the American?
Yeah. There's a British one as well who seems really...
Oh, yeah, he's a little shit.
We're not taking visitors
Yeah.
at the moment. I think he might be the Punch and Judy one, but I get confused because there's so many of them we see.
Yes, him as well. And then Bobby's a weird little lad, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's relishing in the violence that's taken place in his home, taking photos of it before doing anything else, snapping photos of two bloodied old men that have broken into his home and killed his father. He maybe doesn't know that at that point, but yeah, and then relishing in using the attack dogs. So he's got a weirdness to him.
That idea of like cloning Hitler and is this going to be the next Hitler? That goes back to our time travel series when we looked at if you could go back in time and kill Hitler before he became Hitler, would you do it? And this kind of is bringing up a similar kind of premise, isn't it? Because it's saying, okay, there are all these identical clones and they have the potential to grow up to be like Adolf Hitler. Do you get rid of them now, or do you let them just grow up and then find out because they're all people in their own right?
Yeah. And the film's actually quite didactic about that in the end, isn't it? No, you shouldn't kill them. Is how the moral lesson of the film ends. Literally the last scene is like a moral debate between two characters on whether or not you should kill baby Hitler. Well, it's slightly different though, isn't it? Like it's a free will debate, isn't it? The baby Hitler question is a time travel paradox question, and a moral question to you, the person being asked, like, would you do it? Could you do it? You know what that specific baby will grow up to do. And then this is a different question. We've got genetically identical babies. Should we kill them on the off chance they might grow up to be like Hitler? I mean, certainly the way it's presented in the film, like I agree with Lieberman. Like the children are a bit weird. The ones that we see, they're not nice kids, but the circumstances of their upbringing are, even with the attempt to control it, so dramatically different from the context that brought Hitler into the world. I don't believe that these children will go on. The bigger threat is, in the universe of the film, is Mengele getting control of them and then puppeteering them into a dictator, moulding them in the image that he wants.
When Bobby is faced with that revelation that, oh, you are a clone of Hitler, he's just like, you're weird. Like,
which is the right answer to that,
yeah.
Isn't it? For a 14-year-old boy confronted with that information by a man that's broken into your home.
Yeah, he's like, you're crazy. You are mad.
Yeah. Correctly identified and gives credence to Lieberman's assessment of the situation, right? Like, the boy is not inherently evil.
But there is that kind of question mark towards the end when you see Bobby developing the photos and he's got that necklace of Mengele's, or the bracelet, whatever it is.
I think that scene is not in all versions of the film, and possibly not
Really?
in the original theatrical cut. Yeah, it was on the version I saw.
Yeah.
So it ends. So we have this moral showdown between Lieberman and the Jewish American Nazi hunter guy who wants to kill all these kids. I think that might be the original ending. And then there is this scene where, I mean, how would you describe it? It's a sort of, not a twist ending. It's a tease of has Lieberman made a mistake ending.
Yeah, it's that open question mark at the end, which puts doubts into everybody's minds. Like, has he done the right thing, like you say? But the whole film has kind of got this tinge of, are we doing the right thing? Are there secret organizations still around in new guises? The idea of fascism still being there in the shadows. There's a whole scene when Mengele goes to a Nazi party, and it is like it's literally a party, and then they're all just doing salutes and taking photos in their sort of SS gear. It's absolutely mad, but it's kind of just, it's showing that there's this seedy underworld that is still happening. And I think if you look at the 70s, when the Cold War was still happening as well, this idea of the sort of hidden enemy was very prevalent.
Yes.
So showing that in this really puts it into perspective, and looking at it from that kind of viewpoint of being in the 70s and being like, okay, there's all of this fear around. This would have, again, heightened it, but putting it in this kind of thriller sci-fi world makes it a little bit more palatable and easier to watch, which makes it become this really intriguing film and book.
Presumably book, yeah. Yeah, I wonder if they tacked on that ending to just make it a bit more morally grey. Yeah, like I said, that scene in the hospital can be a little bit didactic. So maybe they just added that on to open that question of the nature and nurture combination in these boys. But I think Lieberman's point stands either way, doesn't it? That it's a moral question of whether not could these boys grow up to be monsters. That's not the question being asked. It's should we kill them anyway is the question. And it's a firm answer that no. Like if they do grow up to be monsters, then we as a society have to deal with that and contend with that and deal with them. But it's not right to prejudge and then kill them, basically. That's morally wrong. That's his point. So I guess to come back to the question, is the technology evil? It's, I suppose, no. And it's interesting that they have that conversation about cloning Mozarts, because they're both quite animated about the idea of wouldn't that be good to have hundreds of Mozarts in the world enriching our culture and able to write many more symphonies than Mozart did. It's just who's in control of the technology and how is it used.
It even kind of goes back to stuff like Gattaca, and if your genes are predetermine your life, And does it go that far that if you are a clone of someone, does that determine who you will be when you grow up? Again, the nature-nurture stuff is really interesting in this whole film.
Yeah, I think the nature-nurture stuff is the most interesting question raised by the film thematically. What about just moments in the movie? Was there stuff that you particularly enjoyed or that stood out to you?
Well, the whole film was actually quite theatrical. It was more theatricality. I mean, you've got Gregory Peck and Laurence Olivier, so it's going to have its fair share of dramatic moments. But I think it was quite knowing in what it was doing as well with those kind of performances. I mean, there were moments like, I don't know, there's really weird stuff that sticks in my head in this film as well. Like there's one of the Nazis who goes on a mission to one of these little towns. I think it's quite a snowy town. I don't know if it's...
Oh, in like Sweden or somewhere.
Yeah, I was going to say Sweden. And then he meets this guy on the bridge and they're talking about it. And he's like, oh no, I don't know if I want to do this. And then it's really dramatic. And it turns out that this guy that he's talking to is the one who has the Hitler clone. And he just chucks him over the side of this... What is it, like a
dam,
reservoir, a dam? Yeah. So he just chucks him over and it's really dramatic. And when this obvious kind of like dummy falls into the dam, like the head comes off and stuff. I was like, something comes off of the body. And I was like, that's so dramatic and sort of over the top. There were a few moments like that. And again, a weird thing that sticks in my head is when Lieberman was going to visit another one of the clones. And the mum keeps like showing him her leg and things like that and trying to like entice him. So it's got these kind of strange moments to switch up the pacing as well throughout. So those bits stuck in my head. Obviously the attack dog moment at the very end, the very gory end to the film. What about you? What kind of things stuck in your head about this film?
Yeah, the gory end. I do think that final showdown between Mengele and Lieberman is excellent. Peck and Olivier are extremely good throughout the film. And seeing just two old men who passionately hate each other. They're not super tough young guys, but they have a really brutal fight with each other. It was really good and a well-earned moment in the movie. I also really liked there's a scene in the middle where Lieberman goes to confront the prison guard that he helped put away. Not confront, he wants to basically just get some information out of her. He's actually trying to be quite nice because he needs to get information out of her, but the rising tension between them, they hate each other as well. Any sort of false rapport to get information just breaks down. And when he sort of stands up and it's like, do you know what? I'm going to walk out of here a free man. You're not a guard anymore. Go fuck yourself, basically. Like that was brilliant. That was wonderful performance from Olivier and also from Uta Hagen as the guard. Like really excellent performance between those two. And, just like a really exciting showdown between characters where there's no real action in the scene. It's just pure acting and performance.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one to look at in our Mad Science series, this one. It's got real historical figures in there, but it has this kind of fictional tinge to it. And the idea of the cloning is really interesting. But I think it's also this idea of, do your surroundings affect who you are and who you grow up to be in this case? And I think the next film we're going to talk about has that kind of stuff going on as well. So shall we talk about Das Experiment from 2001?
Yes, let's. Hi listeners, hope you're enjoying the show. If you want to support us and get access to hundreds of hours of bonus episodes, you can sign up to our Patreon.
We've got discussions on all the latest sci-fi films in cinemas, the Bad Movie Bunker, and Patrons' Picks, as well as mini-series covering your favourite franchises.
Patrons get to have their say on what we cover, both over on Patreon and right here on the main show too.
So if you want to join, head over to patreon.com/Journey Through Sci-Fi.
Now, back to the episode.
You are invited to participate in a unique psychological experiment. A project designed to study the effects of authority and obedience. Selected subjects will be divided into two groups, guards and prisoners.
So this is from 2001, Das Experiment, which is German for The Experiment, directed by Oliver...
Did you have to look that one up?
Which is directed by Oliver Hirschbiegel. And it's based on a novel called Black Box, but it's also very, very heavily based, or the novel, it must be heavily based on the Stanford Prison Experiment from 1971. So should we give a quick setup of what the Stanford Prison Experiment was, James?
So the Stanford Prison Experiment was a very controversial experiment that happened to a bunch of college students in Stanford. And they were all recruited to take part in this experiment. And they had to take on the roles of prison guards and prisoners. And they were all paid for their time, weren't they?
Yeah, it was quite a well-paying job at the time. And they were simulating a prison, with some of them being guards, some of them being prisoners, and ostensibly left to their own devices. And everything just fell apart within days, within 4 or 5 days, I think, with the guards basically torturing the prisoners by the end of that, and the prisoners begging to be let out, and they were finally let out, and it kind of became a big scandal pretty quickly. Like, it became national news almost immediately as these students got out and told their stories of what had been happening to them. And Philip Zimbardo, the guy in charge of the experiment for Stanford, touted this as proof of human nature, basically, that there's this sort of underlying capacity for evil in all people if they are given the ability to express that. And that's what he claims the experiment did and proved. I think it's been controversial, as you said, in that, it became a news story and then contributed to like the development of like ethical guidelines and practices for scientific experiments, just because of the cruelty of the experiment itself. And then I think later down the line, the findings have been challenged. I think Philip Zimbardo has been accused of putting his thumb on the scale a little bit, or quite a lot even, and encouraging the guards to be cruel, basically, and be very heavy-handed in their enforcement. And that's the story that some of the guards participating have told. So it's an interesting, horrible and weird experiment that happened in the early 70s. And that is basically the plot of this movie, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much it unravels in the same kind of way. And it goes from this story from the 70s to this film in 2001. So in this, we're going from the kind of laboratory and the mad science that we've been exploring so far to a experiment, which is a whole human behavior study. So it's this psychological experiment that these people are putting themselves up for. And this takes some artistic license with its depiction of this experiment. It goes in directions that the Stanford experiment didn't, and it takes it to the extreme in some of the cases. But it's one of the most anxiety-inducing films I've watched in a long time.
Really?
And I, like, revisiting this film, I was kind of like, I remember it being quite good, and I was watching it, and sort of like through the first half, I was like, okay, like I get what's happening, something bad's going to happen. And then as it went on, I just kept feeling that something bad's going to happen, and it was having like a real effect on me, anxiety-wise.
Wow.
And I don't know whether it's the sort of like, it's obviously the performances, the way it's shot, the way the story unfolds, the way that they're developing the characters throughout and the changes you see with them. All of that I found really affecting, and I wasn't expecting to have that kind of response to this film.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think it's to do with the way it's structured more than anything. It's very smooth. It's a very smooth trajectory of things getting worse for the characters. It just happens progressively and consistently throughout the film. The behavior of the guards just gets worse and worse and more unpleasant in one straight line. There is a ray of hope, right, in the main character. The main character is plural that we have, because what I think is actually amazing about the film, what makes it such a good film, is that we know about the Stanford Prison Experiment. This is a fictionalization of that, but they have done a very, very good job of making that into a movie story. Yeah. It's not just an experiment where you have one group and another group, and here's what happened. There are characters that are fully fleshed out. You have a main character, and that does lead to like an expectation that they're going to escape, right? Or I don't know, you tell me, you were very anxious. Did you think that was going to happen?
I thought it could have gone one of two ways. Like maybe some of them will escape, but some of them won't. And I didn't know which one of them wasn't going to make it. And I think that's what put me on edge when I was watching it, because it's been so long since I've seen it. I didn't remember exactly how it went down towards the end. But you've got your mad scientist in this, I guess, is the professor running the show, the one who's doing the experiment. So you've got Professor Thon, who is kind of observing this all. And he is depicted in this as being on the sidelines, but constantly pushing for the experiment to carry on. And that gives him that kind of maniacal edge in this. He is very much... He's told by his colleagues that we should stop this experiment now. His female colleague, Dr. Jutta Grimm, says like we should stop now. It's like you can see the prisoners, the people in the experiment are like psychologically feeling this more and more, and it's like it's a bit of a sort of boiling point now. So we need to shut it down. But despite this, he continues to back it, and he's like, no, we're getting close to a breakthrough. Like all mad scientists, his hubris has got the better of him. He wants to carry on with the experiment.
There's also a suggestion that he, like the accusations against Zimbardo, has put his thumb on the scale, right? Because there are discussions about Beirut, the guard, Beirut in particular, and Beirut in relation to Tarek, the lead character. He explicitly says that there's something important about their personalities. So some sort of screening has happened to pick out people who will be a certain way and behave a certain way, which is the sort of main accusation that's been leveled against Zimbardo about the Stanford experiment not proving what he set out to prove because he influenced it in that way. So I think it's mirroring that real life element of Zimbardo in the depiction of Thon.
And in terms of the film showing that and those character dynamics, it's really interesting the way we're introduced to everyone. So we're following Tarek, who's our main protagonist. He's this taxi driver who seems to have had like a more interesting career prior to this. He studied philosophy, like ethics and things like that. He was a journalist at some point, and he's just fallen into taxi driving to kind of just pay the bills for the time being. But he's a very interesting guy, and he finds this experiment. He knows that it's paid. We think that he's just doing it for the money initially, but it turns out he wants to sell the story to someone that he knows about this experiment. Like it's an interesting thing to put in the press, and it could go either way. So you're following Tarek, but then you're slowly introduced to the other people in the experiment. And this is before we know who's going to be a prisoner, who's going to be a prison guard. And each of the characters is kind of shown as being just your average Joe. They've all got different things that they do. One of them's an Elvis impersonator. The other one runs like a little kiosk. And you see little sides of these characters. And people like Beres are very unassuming. Yeah. You don't think much about them at the start. And then they're sort of put in this position of power and powerless. So you've got the prisoners and the prison guards. And suddenly when they're put in this position, their characters change and the way they respond to each other completely changes. And that's when it gets really interesting in terms of the dynamics between all these different characters.
Yeah, so when does it first start to unravel, and when do the cracks start to show? It's pretty early on, isn't it?
It feels like almost as soon as they go in, there's this kind of change in everyone. Like the way that the prisoners are just given this kind of gown to wear, and they're given numbers, and they have to refer to each other by numbers. They're not given any underwear. They've literally just got this kind of gown, this dress thing that they're wearing. And just the way the prison guards are responding to them, they're trying to get control of the situation. The prisoners are having a laugh. They're like, this is a bit of fun. It's an experiment. But slowly but surely, they start leaning into their roles. So the prison guards decide, okay, we need to get control over these people, so we're going to be more firm. And by being more firm, the prisoners kind of quieten down a bit, except for Tarek, because he wants to really rile things up, because initially he wants to get a story, doesn't he? He's got these secret spy glasses, so he's videoing stuff and taking pictures, but it all just gets slowly more and more ominous as things go on.
Yeah, I think the first really cruel thing that happens is the milk scene. And that's interesting because the guards are enforcing the rules. It's the just following orders defense, and the rules are quite arbitrary. You got the general principle that the guards have to maintain order makes sense for a sort of prison recreation experiment or whatever. But then there's a rule that all of the prisoners must finish all of their meals. That's just thrown in there, and it just sounds incredibly arbitrary. But it's weaponized pretty early on because one of them is lactose intolerant and doesn't want to drink his milk because it'll make him sick. And Tarek intervenes. But that's kind of like the first outright cruel thing that happens, I think, but it is following the rules at that point. But then it's not long after that we get the scene where they strip them all naked in the middle of the night and to humiliate them. And that's an idea that comes from Belarus. That's from within the guards. That's not enforcing any. Well, they claim it's enforcing the rules, but that's a sort of an original idea that they've come up with off their own backs and decide to execute. And that accelerates things a little bit in terms of the cruelty. Thon just like, oh, that's interesting that they've done that.
Yeah, they're constantly being watched, aren't they, and videotaped by these scientists who are just observing and trying to get a gauge on how this is affecting these people in the experiment. But the power dynamics change as well, because Belarus goes from being quite quiet and everyone kind of taking the piss out of him, then like, oh, you stink. And he's obviously got a big chip on his shoulder. And bit by bit, he kind of takes charge. There is a different prison guard who is in control at the start. I think he's one of the younger ones. And then over time, Belarus kind of decides that he is the leader and takes more control, is doing more and more like harrowing things to the prisoners to try and show his authority, to try and show that he is the one in control. And he really does target Tarek as well, because Tarek makes that comment about him and says like, oh, you stink. And then that results in him and the rest of the prison guards later like pissing all over him and torturing him basically and punching him and strapping him up to a chair. So these assaults get bigger and bigger. But one of the rules of the entire experiment is you're not supposed to be physically violent with anyone. And they kind of let that out the window very quickly.
Yeah. They're violent from a very early stage. There's absolutely no enforcement of that rule at all.
And it gets more and more progressively violent as it goes on. But the kind of dynamic between the prisoners changes as well, because initially they're all sort of friends and they're telling jokes, and then they become more and more lacking in their own identities. Because initially you can kind of tell who's who. Some of them are really jolly. They've all got different like things about them. But as they've kind of been put in this dress and given numbers and have to refer to each other by numbers, they start kind of being dehumanized, don't they? So they're losing their sense of individualism. And that's something which we saw a lot in our dystopia series. Because in those films, it was all about breaking down the population and making everybody equal and the same, and it's all about regularity and everything has to be a certain way, which again goes back to the boys from Brazil. It's that kind of Third Reich idea, that Nazi idea of like the perfect race of everybody being the same, acting the same. And it's that kind of that dehumanization is so interesting in this, and just how that affects them mentally and how they're kind of like really ground down to like the bare bones of their personalities.
Yeah. And Tarek is bearing the brunt of that. But there's other characters that really struggle as well, like Shoot, for example, who is the one with the lactose intolerance, who just over time, is he the one that dies as well eventually?
Yeah.
He is just not able to deal with it, basically, is he? Like he's subjected to a lot of cruelty, not necessarily more than any other prisoner, but like the mental toll that it has on him gets away from him, I guess, and he ends up just get like hit on the head really hard, and the concussion ultimately leads to his death.
I'm not sure if he chokes on his own blood because
right.
he's got his mouth taped up, hasn't he?
Yes,
Either way, he like dies in a horrific manner because of this abuse that's happening directly from Berusse. But there's other characters in the ensemble of prisoners as well. You've got quite a few which respond very badly to this. There's a guy who gets like physically ill, and I think it's Joe Mayer. He reacts really badly to it, and he's called out for trying to leave because he gets really sick, and then when he tries to leave, the guards are like, "No, you're a sissy," and they make him stand naked in the corner with a sign on his back for an unbelievable amount of time, and you kind of forget about him, and they do another shot, and he's still there, and it's this constant, like, they're doing things, just kind of leaving them there and forgetting about the impact it's having on these people.
And you see the cruelty of the experiment through him as well, don't you? Because he actually does formally apply to leave and gets to go beyond the guards, speak to the scientists, and they're just like, yeah, we'll think about it. We'll let you know. We'll let you know what we decide. And it's like, what do you mean, what you decide? I'll decide whether I am allowed to leave a prison or not. It's an experiment. Let me go.
Yeah.
That was quite a scary scene, I thought, like, because it was outside of the experiment is horrifying, but he had a moment to step outside of that and have what should have been a real conversation external to the experiment, but he was still trapped in it, and that was like, oh, there's really no escape for these guys.
That's the frightening thing about this, isn't it? Because they're all volunteers. They are doing this to get paid, and then that kind of threat of not being paid becomes weaponized, doesn't it, by some of them, especially the prison guards. They kind of use that as their entire kind of mantra. They're like, we need to be this cruel and this controlling, because if we don't, we're going to fail the experiment and none of us are going to get paid. So they keep going back to that as kind of an excuse for their actions, which is like horrendous.
Another character I really like is Steinhoff.
Yeah.
So Steinhoff is Tarek's other cellmate, who is basically an undercover Air Force operative sent to observe and report on the experiment. What did you think of Steinhoff?
I thought he was really good because he's the steady hand amongst all of the quivering fingers of the prisoners. He's just like, he's there, he's the voice of reason, he's just kind of in the background. And when it comes down to it, he's going to be the one that's going to fuck everyone up if he needs to, because he's a trained military officer. So he'll get out of it.
Yeah, so this is what I mean about making it feel a bit more like a film story than the real life experiment. Like, throw in a journalist who has motivation to like explore and prod and do those things, and also record and kind of report back to the world, which gives some hope of getting out. And then you also throw in like a basically badass like Air Force character, so when things get to their inevitable conclusion, from a sort of film action point of view, the prisoners have a fighting chance of defending themselves because there's some badass character in the mix.
How did you see the kind of growth in the police guards, in how they act and how they get more confident in their role? What did you think about the development of that from the start of the film towards the end?
I think so. There's like three distinct guard characters that I can remember and that stand out, and that's Berusse, that we've talked about already, Eckhart, who is the Elvis impersonator, and Bosch, who is the one that gets thrown into the prison. They stand out because they're sort of the three most interesting ones, aren't they? Bosch is really interesting that he's seemingly more moral, I guess, than the other ones, and he can't go along with it, but he just gets absorbed into the experiment as another victim of it, and essentially becomes a prisoner. And Baruch is still trying to like give him instructions at the very end of the film, like, no, help me catch these guys when they're all breaking out. And then Eckhart I found really interesting from the perspective of how he's written, because he is definitely he's a bit comedic at the start of the film. He's goofy, right? He's an Elvis impersonator. He's singing Elvis songs, and he ends up being one of the worst, right? He kidnaps Dr. Grimm, the woman who's co-leading the experiment. Well, they all sort of collectively grab her, do they? It's sort of a collective decision on the guards, but he's the one that goes into her cell and tries to rape her after they've done that. So he goes from this sort of jovial, comical figure to being one of the most terrifying members of the guard group.
It's just how easy it is for him to switch into that, which I think is really scary, because they're only in the prison for 6 days, something like that. They're supposed to be there for 2 weeks, but within that short amount of time, everything completely goes off the rails. And for whatever reason, Baruch kind of persuades everyone that, look, we need to go into lockdown. We need to do this because this is part of the experiment and this is what they want. They want us to be these kind of brutal prison guards.
Yeah, he really drums up some paranoia and concocts a story that the guards are pretty willing to go into his narrative, which takes them down an even darker route than they were already on.
Yeah, they go from just trying to order the prisoners around to using the fire extinguishers, stripping them naked and taking away their bedding. And I think the fire extinguisher thing is something that actually happened in the Stanford experiment as well. I think that's directly taken from there. So they start doing that, and then after that, it's the humiliation. They make Tarek clean a toilet with his prison garb, and then wear it afterwards. And it's like
shave
real victimizing. Yeah, shave his head, all of these things. And then it kind of culminates in Tarek's kind of abuse into feeding off of his claustrophobia and sticking him in the black box, which all of the scientists say that is just there as a kind of warning. It's not meant to be used, but the fact that it gets used on Tarek is really harrowing again.
Yeah, I hated the way it was just looming there for quite a long time in the film, and we kept seeing it.
So long.
I was like, oh my God, someone's going in the box.
But again, to try and dramatize it and to give it that kind of filmic quality, they've also added in this love story with Dora as well. What did you think about that as kind of another thing going on in the film? Because I get why they did it, because they're kind of giving Tarek a motivation for why he wants to get out.
Yeah.
But how did you feel it worked in terms of the film?
I really liked Dora showing up for the film's climax. I thought that just added a bit more tension and excitement. She's kind of wandering around with a gun filled with blanks right at the end of the film, Chekhov's blank gun. But it was weird, wasn't it? The romance between them, because it's the way it's presented in the film. It kind of feels like they have just met, like right before he goes into the experiment, spend one night together, and then she spends weeks just like, not weeks, sorry, it only takes place over like 5 days, doesn't it? But she spends those 5 days.
It feels like a long time.
Yeah, it does, yeah. And she's just like yearning for him and like hanging out at his flat and wondering where he is. And the pacing of it is really weird as well, isn't it? It sort of interjects into the narrative of the experiment. And
there's kind of this similarity between the grief that she's going through and the kind of directionlessness that Tarek feels. I think there's some kind of comparison being drawn between that and it's like emotional distress. So Dora's going through emotional distress, and then Tarek is putting himself through emotional distress by being part of the experiment. Yeah, that's the kind of link they have with each other, I suppose, isn't it? But it's weird in the film because it almost feels inevitable that Dora's going to show up, because there are so many scenes where there's like crossfades and it seems like they're yearning for each other, you expect some sort of coming together. It's him wandering and dreaming about escaping, and it's a lot about that kind of escape from the situation. So in his kind of fantasy moments where he's thinking about her, he can escape from the experiment and the prison. But in reality, they could leave at any given time, supposedly, but it's constantly just the idea that they're not allowing themselves to leave either. And that bit when Behrus talks to Dora, that was so frustrating when he's like, nope, Tarek is done with you now. He doesn't want to see you anymore.
Yeah.
And that like really like put me on edge again.
Yeah. Yeah. You'd insist to hear it from Tarek, right? Wouldn't you?
Luckily, the fact that she realizes it and appears at the end is another sort of great moment in the film. But it's just the absolute violence that it ends on as well. You've got Bosch hitting the Elvis impersonator over the head with a fire extinguisher continuously. You've got people getting, like, Tarek almost gets stabbed. The Professor Thorne ends up getting shot in the eye with one of those blanks, which
kills him.
Yeah. So he gets killed.
What did you think about him dying in the experiment from in the mad scientist context?
It's almost, well, in the mad scientist context, he is killed by his experiment.
Yeah.
It's gone wrong. But it's also like, I wanted to see him get his comeuppance and the world seeing how terrible the thing that he has done really is.
Yeah, it's fitting for a mad scientist. It's a fitting way to go for a mad scientist, as we've seen from other films. But yeah, I think because it immediately switches to like newsreel. Here's what happened afterwards. You know, this guy's Behrus is arrested and scientists will have to answer to a court. That felt unsatisfying immediately afterwards because you're like, Thon should be up there in court answering for this. Like he's in charge.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because it's the same with Gregory Peck in The Boys in Brazil.
Yeah.
You are happy that his character is killed off at the end, but then there's also part of you wanting him to deal with more. Like
get dragged to court, stand trial, yeah, all of that, yeah, of course.
So it's that kind of...
Which is what Lieberman wants to happen, but is forced into, a showdown.
Yeah, but in both instances, it is the mad scientist having to pay for what they've done.
Yeah.
And dying in some sort of gruesome, grisly way.
Yeah. So what were the bits that you found most difficult to watch then? You talked about your anxiety watching the film. What really hit you? Oh,
the whole film, Matt. The whole thing. I think it was just bit by bit knowing that something terrible was going to happen again. And just getting, like, even when Tarek's got the screwdriver in the box, I was like, oh, well, he's going to stab someone that he shouldn't stab.
Yes.
And it's that constant, you don't know how far they're going to go or how they're going to react to these different situations and just where the line is. And I think that's what really terrified me because it's an experiment. You're watching it as an outsider, as an audience member, going, this is clearly an experiment. These people don't have to be doing what they're doing. There are cameras around, there are people observing, but they're just going down this road that they can't stop going down.
I was most stressed out by Tarek just provoking everyone in the kind of first half of the film because I knew how the Stanford experiment ended up. So I kind of knew the general direction of the plot of the movie. So when Tarek is aggravating the guards and deliberately provoking them, I was like, oh my God, stop doing that. They're gonna kill you, basically. I was worried for him and worried for the impacts on the other prisoners. And I wasn't encouraged when the prisoners were all coming together, where they all do like press ups together and it's like, they're coming together. I was like, no, you're all going to be punished for this. This is not going to end well for anybody.
Did you think that Tarek was going to die?
No, because he felt like the main character. I thought that he was going to get somebody killed and be responsible for somebody else's death. And I mean, arguably, that's how it goes, isn't it? With Shoot, Shoot dies. And obviously, the guards are culpable, but Tarek was in there deliberately provoking things to get the story to move along in a more interesting direction.
The sympathy you feel for Shoot as well throughout, because they really, again, it's a film, they've dramatized it. The fact that he doesn't have anybody to write to.
Yeah, he's so
really
downtrodden.
Wants to buy a Ferrari.
Yeah,
and that's
God.
like his dream. All these little bits just to really make that moment when he is killed off really hit.
Yeah. And even Tarek's like, you're not going to buy a Ferrari for this money. I did try to look it up, so it's 4,000 Deutschmarks. I found it a bit hard to figure out because Deutschmark doesn't exist anymore. But I think I found like a comparison to 2001 pounds and adjusted for inflation in today's money, it's about £2,500. So it's not Ferrari money.
Not even with special dealer.
Not even special dealer 1989 Ferrari, I don't think. Just a real sad sack, isn't he? Shoots.
Yeah.
And
Heartbreaking.
You don't want to see him hurt anymore.
No, you don't. Complete opposite to the RAF character who is like karate chopping people and stuff towards the end and absolutely going crazy, but still ends up like getting handcuffed to something in the kitchen. Yeah. But you've got all that dramatic stuff at the end, and then the kind of epilogue to it is Tarek and Dora on a beach, not having the champagne and food that they've got when the news is going on. They're just sort of like out on the beach.
Enjoying their freedom.
Yeah, enjoying the freedom because they're out in the open world. I quite liked that. I was a bit disappointed they didn't take the champagne with them. Yeah. But that was more just like... that
seemed like it was getting warm.
Yeah, like you just look at this lovely food that you've just left there staring at this bleak news report.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a strange scene. But I guess he wasn't being forced to finish his food, was he? That's the positive.
Ah, that's very good. Very good. As was that film.
Yeah, I loved it. It was tense, but it was a very good film. Both of these were very good films, and I'm really happy we covered them, even though I was a bit nervous about talking about the context that they sit in.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for today's episode of Journey Through Sci-Fi. Make sure you're subscribed to the show on whatever podcast platform you use so you can get the new episodes as soon as they come out.
You can find more from us online if you visit our website, journeythroughscifi.com, or follow us on any of the social medias that you use. We're probably on there.
Yeah, we'll probably be about on some of them. I mean, it's hard to maintain that amount of social media websites, but we do our best. And remember, guys, if you want a free and easy way to support the podcast, why not leave us a lovely comment and review on your podcast app of choice? Once again, it's a quick and easy way to help new listeners discover the show. So please do that. We'd be very grateful.
Another way to support the show, if you want to get all of our bonus content as well, is to head on over to patreon.com/journey through sci-fi, where we put out bonus episodes to our patrons. What will we be doing next time on the show, James?
Next time on the show, we have a couple of interesting art housey sci-fi films to look at. We'll be looking at Altered States from 1980, and we are pairing that up with Upstream Colour from 2013.
Ooh, returning to the small filmography of Shane Carruth, I haven't seen Upstream Colour since it came out, and I loved it and I didn't understand it, so I'm looking forward to finally discussing it in depth with someone and trying to get my head around it.
Oh, definitely. And we've had a lot of people message us saying, are you going to cover Altered States on the podcast? Well, guys, you don't have to wait any longer because we'll be covering it very, very soon.
That's all for this time. We will be back soon, listeners.
Bye.